cap percentages for the 7? What you don't know about the stock market, but maybe you should.
Brent, I am so excited about this because I love when we can teach people things they might not know had they not gone to a university and learned about investing and took the finance classes and have the designations. We get to share that kind of information with our folks. And not only that, we get to answer the questions that you care about. We get to speak to the things in your life that you are curious about. And we love that we can do that every Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. And so right now we have the team out in the wings collecting your questions, and we want to load you up because we believe that there's a better way to do money. And we also believe that you should subscribe right now to the channel. With that, I'm gonna throw it over to you, Creative Director Reby.
Agreed. Don't forget to hit subscribe while we ask Dario's question. He says, with the S&P 500 being heavily leaning on the Magnificent Seven tech stocks, would you consider it well diversified?
I like this question because it seems like headlines always are telling you, hey, okay, you hear some people all the time, hey, just buy the S&P 500, just buy the S&P 500, just buy the index. It's the lowest cost index out there. Just do this, just... And then there are the naysayers who come in and are like, but wait, if you buy the S&P 500, well, what are you really buying? You're buying these 7 companies that happen to be the largest concentrations, and the movement of the market is dictated by those 7 companies. I just think it's very interesting, Brian, how short our memories are. And also, in my opinion, how illogical we can be when we think about the way we invest, why we invest, and how we invest.
Yeah, I love this because this lets us dive into the details of when somebody says invest in the S&P 500. Yes, it's the 500 biggest companies in the United States. But if you actually put some mental horsepower to know what this means, does that mean that every stock of the 500 is 1/500th? Or is there something more going on? And that's why, guys, when I talk to you about don't try to beat the market, be the market, there's an element of this is that you're also, what you're counting on the market to do for you is that if there is somebody who comes up with a better mousetrap, meaning that there's innovation that is taking the world by storm and it's growing and it's becoming more and more successful, if you're buying the S&P 500, you're going to naturally get that. Well, and part of what happens with that, it's not that you're getting 1/500th, that you're hoping that one stock does well. What happens with the S&P 500 is it's market weight kind of spread out. So if you think about like Apple is very close to 7% of the S&P 500. So that is far from being 1/500th of the value. It's actually 7% of it. And you see the same thing with Microsoft. You see the same thing with Google/Alphabet, Amazon, NVIDIA, because you guys picked on me from the Southern way I said it last time, so I practiced in the mirror a few times this morning. Meta, which is, of course, Facebook, and then Tesla. All these things, yes, Bo's exactly right. We had the FANGs before this, and this is the part of the clean process of if you're a small company or a company that used to be prominent, but now you're out of favor because your innovation and other things are falling off, you're going to be a much smaller portion of your investment in the S&P 500. But if you're doing amazing things, you don't have to try to capture that through an individual stock. Jump in on the S&P 500 and you get that momentum as well.
Yeah, a market cap weighted index, one measured by the market capitalization of the companies that comprise the index, will always be concentrated towards the top. That's the way that it works. That's the way that the index is actually designed. But I like Dario's question because Dario went a little bit deeper, said, hey, would you consider this well diversified? Now that is a different question. Do I think it's well diversified across the 500 largest companies in this country? Yes, I would say that the S&P 500 is still diversified in that aspect. But is that a diversified holding? Well, maybe not when you think about total portfolio construction, because you know what every company inside the S&P 500 has in common? It's a U.S. large cap stock. So when you think about portfolio construction and how you diversify, you might not just want to own all large companies. You might want to own some small companies, or you might want to own international companies. You might not want to just own equities. You might want to own fixed income or risk off or risk reduced types investments. So we love, when it comes to a singular asset class, we love using the S&P 500 for that singular asset class. But when we talk about diversified portfolios, S&P 500 is a single holding inside of a single asset class that represents a total portfolio. So is it a good option for that asset class exposure? Yes, we love that. Would we stop there in terms of diversifying your assets once you've reached the point that diversification makes sense? Probably not. I think that you could go a little bit further, a little bit deeper in that. Even with the Magnificent Seven, Brian, I'm still buying S&P 500 every single month.
Me too. That's a big ditto.
There you go. Dario, thank you for the question. Great question. We got to talk about some nuances of the stock market that you may or may not have known. And we just always appreciate you all asking these questions so we can talk about what you want to talk about. With that being said, we're moving on to Michael's question. He said, I'm about to be a grandparent.
Oh,
Congrats,
congratulations.
that's exciting. And considering putting $10,000 into a dividend trust for my grandchild to access at 35. What are your thoughts or recommendations on this type of investment for a grandchild or this type of situation to use in the future?
Bo, I'll get you to get into the technical stuff, but something I always think about is we have clients that whenever we're doing estate planning or anything that is way out in the future, you always tell people, get in the shoes of making sure you're not creating unintended consequences. Because I think about, we have a very successful client who had a father who was in the medical field, who set up all these trusts, and then the son turns out to be extremely successful in his own right. And there's a little bit of a cloud over the fact that he has to deal with the annual administration. Matter of fact, we had to help unwind some of that. So when I hear somebody say, hey, I'm a grandparent, I'm thinking about putting $10,000 in this dividend trust with the goal of 35, what do you think, and this is kind of leading you into the question, what do you think the grandchild's going to think when they turn 18 or 19 and they need to go to college? What do you think they're going to think when they're 26 or even 32 and want to buy that first house, somewhere in between that? Do you think they're going to be like, man, I'm so glad that my grandfather set this thing up that comes available at 35?
Well, I think it's going to be interesting. One, I do like that it's at least something that has a finite. Because like in the instance you're talking about, this client is now well in their 60s and they're still dealing with this trust because it was set up the way that it was. At least this one does have that terminal event. I think what's interesting, Michael, as you're thinking about doing this, it is for a very specific goal if it's 35, which means it's probably not going to be to pay for college. It's probably not going to be to help with the first-time purchase of, I don't know, maybe in today's day and age it will be for first-time home purchase. Probably not going to be to buy the first car. So you just have to go into that knowing that. One thing that I do love is if you've not done this, go to moneyguy.com/resources and check out our wealth multiplier. What's great is you can see that if I put in $10,000 today for my grandchild and it grows all the way out until age 35, what kind of gift am I actually giving them? That should get you pretty excited. Now, he used a term in here, Brian. I want to make sure I understand. He said, a dividend trust for my grandchild. And I'm trying to figure out, is he talking about the type of trust that will pay out an income? I don't think so. I think it's supposed to sit there. So then he's talking about, I'm going to go buy like dividend type holdings inside of the trust structure. Because I have thoughts both ways. Because if that is what you're saying, hey, I'm going to go buy a dividend, blue chip, whatever, that's fine if that was the strategy you wanted to deploy inside of this vehicle. But what I encourage you to remember is that when it comes to rates of return, there are two different ways that returns are generated. There is income, which is like dividends, interest, coupon payments, that sort of thing. But there's also capital appreciation. And if you have a 35-year window that you're going to allow for these dollars to grow for the benefit of your grandchild, I don't know if I would just exclusively and solely focus on only one component of that return equation. I may look at something more broadly diversified with a bigger mandate and larger capital appreciation potential. Because if you really want to get the most bang for your buck and you're going to put it in a trust and you know the dollars aren't going to be touched, that gives you an opportunity for a lot of growth and a lot of future potential for this asset. For
the only thing I'll throw on there is pay attention to complexity too, because there's already some pretty simple structures. And this is what I was alluding to in my setup, is that like 529s, great for education funding, from not only the simplicity of setting it up, but also from the fact of the tax-free growth and funding the goal of education. Custodial accounts. Now, yes, your child, when they become, or grandchild, when they become age of majority in your state, would get control, but hopefully with good training, good behavioral of understanding, how money works and being good with money when you reach adulthood, that shouldn't be that big of an issue. Those things don't require you to set up a separate trust because it's written into the legislation that funded and made these things available. Whereas when you set up this trust, you have to figure out, is this going to be a simple trust? Is this going to be a complex trust? Because if it's simple, the child's going to be paying the taxes on it. If it's complex, the trust will be paying its own taxes. And then that's got its own, issues with it that just be careful. Think about all these. Begin with the end in mind as you're thinking about these complex things, because that's the part when I get into estate planning and other things, I'm always like, don't get caught up in the sizzle of how cool it would be to structure. Think about what you're actually trying to accomplish, and then let's build this thing as simple and effective as possible so that it doesn't have all these unintended consequences.
I love that, because I think so often people start with the good intention of doing something, not realizing what they're signing people up for. I think people are amazed that you could open up just an excess brokerage account that you house in your name, and you could accomplish this exact same thing with those dollars. Now, yeah, you'll have to pay the taxes. It'll be taxed at your tax rate. And then you could just, have a payable on death designation on that account, or you could list it inside of your estate documents. There are perhaps simpler ways to grant this money to your child. Now, if 35 is something you're really sticking on, then the trust may be it. But I like the idea of keeping it as simple as possible, but no simpler.
Love it. Michael, great question, and congrats again on the new grandchild. That's very exciting. All right, Seth's question is up next. He says, howdy. Theoretically, is there any advantage to filling a tax-deferred bucket if my tax bracket does not justify it? It seems prudent to load up everything in Roth and avoid all taxes come retirement. What do you think?
We get this question a lot. A lot of people tell us, hey, I hear your rule of thumbs, and I know that you say that the dividing line between doing pre-tax and Roth depends on my tax rate. If I'm in the tax situation where I add my marginal federal rate and my marginal state rate and it's below 25%, I should probably do Roth contributions. And if I add my marginal federal, my marginal state, and it's above 30, I should look at pre-tax. Well, I'm in the situation where I'm below 25%, and I'm probably going to stay in 25%, and I'm probably not going to move out of that. Should I just do Roth 401k and Roth IRA and HSA and build up the tax-free bucket? Is there something I'm missing out on? Is there something I'm not thinking of when it's Roth tax-free compared to tax-deferred?
Yeah, Seth, I've said this many times. My favorite of if you're naming your favorite children, the Roth is my favorite because it's tax-free, is ideal. We only recommend outside of that when you really get in those high tax rates and you're hoping that there's an arbitrage situation where you're paying highest tax rates right now, but you think when you retire, your income's going to drop substantially and you're going to be able to pay at a lower tax rate. But what you're getting to, and what Bo is alluding to, is that there's another way you get money in these tax-deferred accounts, and it's typically other people's money, meaning your employer OPMs this money to you as a match. Now, look, I know that, or a profit sharing, I know that there's legislation that passed recently that will allow even this money to be Roth. But tell me in the comments section, I'd be surprised, is anybody actually getting employer money into the Roth yet? And they're getting additional stuff put on their W-2, because these are some of the first years you can do it. And I'm telling you, I bet there's not many out there, because this is like most of the stuff that's written into some of these new legislations. They sound great, but they're so complex to implement that it takes years for the market to actually get caught up to where you see this actually being a decision point for you. So I got to think, Seth, most of your tax deferred money is not going to be your choice. It's just going to be other people's money that gets put in that for you for your benefit, and you get to maximize that free money and really turn it into your wealth building process.
So if all the rules of thumb suggest, hey, continue doing Roth, it's not like Seth should forego the tax-free opportunity in order to build tax deferred.
No.
That probably doesn't make sense. Now, there probably is another line of thinking when you think about like Roth versus after tax, depending on your goals and how you approach that. But specifically for this question, pre-tax versus Roth, I don't think it's crazy.
Yeah, tax deferred has the most issues probably out of the three different account types. You know, tax free, which is Roth, the after tax or your brokerage accounts, and then tax deferred. You feel sad that tax deferred sits in third place, but it has a purpose. Like I said, and other people's free money is definitely still a powerful resource in your wealth building journey.
I love it. We're getting some people. My Roth is 401k, match is not. No Roth 401k match yet. So it sounds like I have not seen a yes.
I mean, I don't. This won't be in that part, but it's just like a few years ago. This was a comment that came up. A few years ago, the legislation came out that your employer could pay back student loan debt tax-free if they did it. So I immediately researched it.
Like, the way the math works is like if you pay someone
$5,000 a year.
If you pay someone $50,000 a year, they could elect to defer $5,000 of their comp to go pay student loans. So they're only taxed on 45. It was a great benefit. It was like a huge thing.
I looked at it. I got both our CPA involved in it, you know, and it just got to the point where they're like, yeah, this thing is so cumbersome. There's not a mechanism to make this. So I'm sure there's probably some big Fortune 500 company that has a whole department that is figured out. But for most small businesses, these things sound great in the brochure, but the implementation is just almost impossible. I mean, think about the fact of even like Roth and the 10-year rules, or IRAs in general, the 10-year inheritance rule, it took them years to come up with clarification. So some of these things are much easier said than to do.
Well, Seth, that was a really good question. Thanks for being here, and thanks for the question. We've got another one from Big Shovel Bob. He says, hello, the wife and I are in our mid-30s and working 1099. Our combined income is $1.4 million with $250K net worth. We are on step 3 of the FOO because we have $400K in student loans. How do we plan for retirement? A friend mentioned cash balance plans. This sounds like an interesting situation. So what would you say to Big Shovel Bob?
So I want to make sure I got this right. Mid-30s, $1.4 million household income, $250,000 net worth, $400,000 in student loans.
So that means the $1.4 million probably is a newfound thing.
Right.
Yeah, because
that's kind of
probably medical professionals.
Big Shovel. I love the name, by the way, Big Shovel, because that's what I always talk about, having a big income.
Awesome.
So Big Shovel Bob is very appropriate. But it has not shown up on his net worth statement just yet.
Well, I think it's so interesting is you may be out there listening and be like, oh man, this cat makes $1.5 million. I bet the rules are different from them. I bet the way that they approach their financial decisions is different. And what you're going to be amazed to hear, Big Shovel Bob, is that we're going to say the first thing you got to do, you got to start with the FOO. Brian, we got the thing up. If you want your own copy, you can go to moneyguy.com/resources because you have to determine, based on where you are in your financial journey, what do each one of these buckets fall into? And so when I hear $400,000 of student loans, I'm like, ooh, that's a lot of debt. But the thing that I don't know is what is the interest rate on those student loans? And for you in your mid-30s, do those student loans count as high interest debt or do they count as low interest debt? You have to answer that question first before then you can begin navigating, okay, well, when it comes to allocating my resources and when it comes to figuring out what types of retirement accounts I should use, do I do a 401k or do I do a cash balance plan? You have to make sure you're following the financial order of operations in the right order.
Yeah. All terrain, all weather, all income types. This thing works. I mean, that's the reality, is because what Bo just described, steps 1 through 3, that student loan, we got to figure out, is it high interest debt or is it more like the low interest debt of step 9? And then that's going to allow you to keep progressing. Then you go, of course, not want to skip and sleep on emergency reserves. Because even though because here's the thing that scares me is when you have a high income, like 1.4 million, it is so easy. I used to deal with professional athletes at one of the early firms I worked at, and they just feel like they have so much money coming in. The problem is, it's short-lived. I mean, the typical NFL career is less than 3 years. At least that's what it was back when I was managing their money when we did some presentations. And I remember thinking about the fact that, yes, it looks like on paper you have all the world just held on. You're holding it on a string. But if you don't actually turn this into net worth, it's a lost opportunity, because I don't know if this 1.4 million, is this something you'll make 1 year? Is this something you'll make 5 years? Is this something you'll make 10 years? Either way, we need to maximize the moment. And that's why the financial order of operations is going to get you through the base level stuff, then help you with the maximization to build your good financial foundation, meaning this shows up on your net worth statement. And then, yes, once you get into steps 8 and 9, let's pay off that student loan debt if it's low, even if it's low interest debt. That's what we try to walk you through, Big Shovel. And I think congratulations. And I love that you found our content right as you're at this incredible fork in the road moment. So get out there and make it happen.
Yeah, I think so. Just so you can take some little nuggets away from this, because Big Shovel Bob did say the average interest rate on the student loans is around 6.5%, but they're in their mid 30s. So one, when you think about opportunity cost, obviously satisfying 6.5% debt. It sounds good. That's a good, noble thing. But you are in this unique situation where your tax rate on the federal side at $1.4 million, not knowing your actual tax return, probably going to be 37% marginal. And then I don't know what state that you live in. So you do have to think about, with every dollar that I deploy, where will that dollar be most efficiently, most effectively utilized? There is a chance that some sort of retirement plan, like a cash balance or something like that, might make sense, because if you could put in, at your age, $200,000 into a cash balance plan, there's a chance I could save you $100,000 in taxes. Well, with that $100,000 of tax savings, you could then theoretically take that and apply it to your student loan. So that way it's not an either or, it's a both and. And I would argue, at an income, even though it's relatively new, he said just entered the workforce a couple years ago, even though that income is relatively new, at $1.4 million of household income, I would argue you, with that big shovel, ought to be able to satisfy a number of different financial goals simultaneously. Saving on taxes, building liquid wealth, as well as satisfying student loans.
This is the complexity. Look, I always say I love that our content is free and it's so approachable for everyone out there. But when somebody like Big Shovel comes along, you got unique stuff going on. Because Bo, I'll put this in the words that Bo was saying, is that just like step 2, is if your employer is offering you 50 cents on the dollar, you kind of have to jump on that free money, because it's just a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. If you're paying 50 cents on the dollar in taxes, which somebody in there making over $1 million, is a good chance that you're paying, especially depending on which state you live in. You could be getting very close to paying 50 cents on the dollar, especially with self-employment taxes and other things that you stack on top of it. So that is something you really will need to pay attention to, the nuances of what do you do with your next dollar. And this is the complexity of where taking the relationship to the next level. Even though you're on the early part of the net worth, you want to make sure you don't mess this up. And that's the part. If you just don't know where your blind spots are, you just don't know what planning tools are in your back pocket. Because here's the other thing about cash balance plans. I love cash balance plans. We use those. We use those with clients. But cash balance plans in the past were set up with life insurance products. And then it wasn't not that many years ago, you've got these third-party administrators that allow you now to open this up to where you could even buy index funds and all kind of other low-cost things that don't have some of the headaches that those insurance products had. But you've got to make sure you're tying into the right person that tells you the full bag of tools at your disposal, not just what they're selling.
I love it.
No, that was great. Thank you so much, Big Shovel Bob. I wasn't sure if I should call you Bob or Big Shovel Bob.
Oh yeah, that's the problem. Is that's why it's not it's hard to answer that just on a money guy stuff, because that's the stuff that I kind of lick my chops when I do those prospect meetings. And I'm like, let me just talk to you about all the things that we can actually do. Where do you want to take this choose your own adventure?
If Big Shovel Bob was here right now, do you know how fun it would be for me and Brian to sit across the table and just go through this? Like, hey, Did you think about this? Did you think about this? Oh, do I do a SEP IRA? Do a solo 401k? Here's that stuff sounds awesome.
Yeah. No, so it's true. Your answer was great because the financial order of operations really is all weather, but then there is some specialized stuff that once you get to a certain point, maybe anyone watching is interested in just seeing what it's like to take it to the next level. You can always go to moneyguy.com and click on become a client and just learn a little bit more there and even fill out a form if you're ready to kind of talk to somebody about that. So yeah, Big Shovel Bob, thanks for the question. Glad you're here.
Great name.
It is a great
I like
name.
it.
It's fun. Okay, ready for Josh's question. He says, how do we maintain focus with leftover income? Where is my purpose? I'm in the messy middle. We have no car note and only a mortgage at 4.75%. So they're saving 24% and plan on maxing the Roth IRA and custodial Roth open. I think that means he's opening one maybe for a child. But I thought that this was interesting because it sounds like he's got a lot of good things going for him. He's doing a lot of things right, but it's kind of how now he has this extra income. How do you treat it? How do you get on the same page?
What did he say the car note was that? The interest rate?
No
car note.
Oh,
Only
no
a
car
mortgage.
note.
And mortgage is 4.7.
At 4.75.
So it sounds like this is what's going on in Josh's life. Hey, I've done all the things, right? I'm in the messy middle. I'm in that stage, but I've paid off the car debt and my home loan is reasonable, and it's the mortgage rate is low. And I find myself with extra discretionary income. I've been able to fund one. That's amazing. It sounds like your messy middle is maybe getting a little bit messier. That's a great thing, worthy and worth celebrating. So then the question becomes, and I thought it was so interesting, just riddled in here was like this deep existential question: where's my purpose? Where's my purpose? And I think that right there, I think that question is the key to the answer of what should I do with the extra income.
So I love when I read critiques of the book and they talk about the fact that, man, it's so basic as he's going through the elements of 1 through 7, but and even the people who are critical of the book, like, but at the end of the book, this guy kind of opens up about what it's like when you're building wealth, some of the questions you ought to ask yourself, the decisions you make. And Josh, you're hitting that. That's exactly, once you get into steps 8, you get into steps 9, you really do need to kind of take control and figure out your life, because you're in a different place when you get to those abundance goals, and the fact that most people work and do things out of obligation, meaning you don't own your life, you don't own your time. You have to go to work to pay your bills. When you're in this place of abundance, you've made good decisions and now you have margin in your life. Guys, you don't have to think about just what you have to do to make wealth. You don't even have to think about the things you have to do just to maintain the wealth. You get to now think about how you want to multiply. And multiply means many things. It could be now you want to, you do want to retire early and own your time. Maybe multiply means that you actually want to fund some organizations that you care significantly about. Maybe multiply means that you also want to help the kids become good with money by helping train them and do other things. This is the part where I always say this is the sexy part of it as well, is because maybe this is when, if you have a spouse, y'all are going out on the date nights to talk about what is the 5-year travel goal? What does it look like on how we want to train the children with money? What do we want this money to do for us and say for us and speak and enable for our lives? This isn't something where you should be troubled by this. This is something you should be excited about it, because this is the part where you own your life and you get to actually make the most of it.
Yeah, I love it. You get to make financial decisions because you want to, not because you have to. And this is, Josh, this is so simple, but every time money comes into my kids' possessions, I've got 3 little kids, 2 of them are old enough to start grasping money concepts now. I tell them there are 3 things we can do with money. Whenever money comes to us, there are 3 things that we can do. We can give it, we can save it, we can spend it. And I like to teach it to them in that order. Well, even we as adults, even as we in our financial journey, when we reach this place where we have discretionary income and we've been able to check all the boxes and we've done all the things that we know we're supposed to be doing, we are still faced with those exact same 3 options. If I have discretionary income, okay, do I want to give it to something? Is there somewhere where I want to be able to use my resources to multiply that wealth? Do I want to save it? And by the way, we tell you that the goal should be to save 25%, but you don't have to stop there. Now, don't mishear me. I'm not telling you, you got to save 40% or 50%, but you could. If you find that you have discretionary income, saving more earlier on gives you more options sooner. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. Or if you are saving the 25%, you're doing all the stuff you're supposed to be doing, there's nothing wrong with spending that money. It may be doing the home improvement. It may be upgrading the automobile, taking the trip, whatever the thing is that you place value on. If you've done all the stuff you're supposed to do and you've done it the way that you were supposed to do it, you are in this magnificent position where you get to choose. What do I want to do with my money? Because ultimately, money is nothing more than a tool that allows me to do the things that I really want to do and focus on the things that I actually care about.
Love it. Josh, thank you for that question. We're really glad you're here. We have a question from Stephanie next. She says, you always mention the 23-8 rule for buying a car, but then also mention that cash is always the best option. Can you explain how much would be too much cash for a car? Should it be a percentage of our total income? Are there any guardrails to that?
Well, it's really one of those things. Cars, and what's funny is we had somebody come in and tour the studio before we even hit record today. And we had a whole conversation on Teslas, and I said the statement, and I say it all the time on the show, is that too many Americans are driving around in their wealth. And that's the big risk that you have. I think it's more of a financial order of operations question, is that 23-8 is supposed to be your lifeline. I mean, somebody's throwing you a life preserver out in the water that you need good, reliable transportation to get to your first wealth building tool, which is a job. And it's supposed to be a very affordable car. I'm thinking we need to be thinking Corolla, not the Land Cruiser, as I've said a gazillion times, is because this is reliable transportation, not something to impress your neighbors, your friends, and your relatives. So if you get to the point that you're in step 8, meaning you've funded all of your financial goals, you've got the cash reserves all set up, you've been saving and investing 25% for a number of years, your path, you even know your number, you know if you're ahead of the curve, behind the curve, or right where you need to be, and you're clearly way ahead of the curve, and you get to step 8, and you say, hey, I'd like to have a nicer car. I'm not going to judge you for that because you did everything else you're supposed to. And you didn't, shortchange your financial and your future self. And that's the big thing that I think people skip is that when I see a 26-year-old go out and buy the BMW, I know that they actually just stole from their future self. I even, in Millionaire Mission, I do an entire section on the timing of big purchases. And I use the case study of what happens when the typical Corvette purchaser buys a Corvette, which is like early 60s, versus if somebody in their 20s tried to buy a Corvette, and what that means to their net worth and what the car payments or what the cost of it would be and the opportunity cost. And you see it's night and day. So just make sure you make those big decisions at the right time.
Yeah, every financial decision we make has an opportunity cost associated with it. If I spend this, then I'm not going to save this. Or if I buy this thing, I'm not going to buy this thing. Automobiles are no different. You said it so wonderfully, Brian, that if you're working through the financial order of operations, here's what you're not doing. You're not saying, hey, you know what? I listen to the guys. They say I got to pay cash for car. I'm going to save up I'm going to save, 20% of my income for the next 3 years. I'm going to build it up in cash. I'm going to go pay cash for the car. Well, when you do that, what you're actually doing is you are sacrificing your future well-being. Even though you didn't go borrow money, even though you didn't go out and finance that automobile, that car was costly because what you did is instead of putting your money to work, having it work for you, you bought a short-term, consumable, depreciable good. So how much car is too much? I don't think we can define that for you because there are some folks who really don't need to spend more than $20,000 on a car, and there are some folks who can freely spend $200,000 on a car. You have to understand where you are in your financial journey, and you have to define, if I make this decision, what sacrifice am I making for the future, and is that an acceptable sacrifice that based on my station in life, I'm comfortable making with this car purchase?
Yeah, another thing while we're talking about cars, like if you put 40,000 miles a year on your car because you're a salesperson or your car is your office, don't go buy a super expensive car.
Doesn't make a lot of sense.
Because you're basically, that is a consumable that you're going to use every ounce of its value very quickly. and it's going to get crushed.
Yep.
I'm always amazed at people who want to drive a European luxury car 45,000 miles a year and watch the value just nosedive. I'm like, why didn't they go buy an affordable Toyota or Honda, put a gazillion miles, they'll get 200,000 miles, because the maintenance kills you on those decisions as well. So pay attention to how you're using things in your life as well, because, and then I have neighbors and I love them to death, but they tell me I'm doing things all wrong, and I just chuckle internally because they flip their cars every two to three years, because they talk to me about these luxury cars, and I'm like, yeah, but that car, if you go look at Consumer Reports, that car is horrible on reliability. And they're like, well, I'm not going to own it for more than 3 years.
We had someone, we talking about,
and I'm like, that you're never going to own the car game. The secret to owning cars, you got to own them past 8 years. I'd prefer for you to own cars past 10 years. And that's the thing that I think a lot of people, when they drive around their wealth, they're doing it all wrong. And I just sit there and I get quiet when we're having those conversations amongst my neighbors, because they don't really want to know the answer.
No, it was a great question, Stephanie. Personal finance is personal, and I hope that kind of helped clarify or give you some things to think about in your own situation as you think about your next car purchase. So thanks for being here, and thanks for the question. Okay, next question is from P61XBP.
I'm writing down P.
Please remember all of those letters and numbers.
Station. Just call him Super Mario. Keep going.
A game station?
Yeah, I mean, when you put out numbers
He
like
jumped
that.
straight to we'll just give him a new name, Super Mario.
Like PS5, think about all the different letters they just...
Oh, like the game system.
Like a game console,
game
yeah.
Station. I'm such not a gamer. I don't even know what that means, but game system. I got you.
Yes.
Because what were the numbers again?
It was P90X, right?
Close.
It's so funny. I think of video game systems. You think of workout routines.
This is so on brand. It was P61XBP.
Okay.
So.
Or it could be like an airplane.
Yeah.
It could be a lot of things.
Yep.
Okay,
honestly.
keep going. Sorry, that's not a question.
Well, the question that this person asked is, if I know that my wife and I will be over the Roth income limits, should we just dollar cost average into Backdoor Roth every month, or do it on January 1st? So they know that they're going to be over the Roth income limit. What should they do about that?
Man, that's creating a lot of complexity and a lot of transactions.
You could. Yeah, I mean, you could likely, dollar cost average into traditional IRA, and then every month convert those dollars to Roth, and then invest those dollars in Roth.
Do you see how many steps that is?
That's a lot. And when
you
think
would do
about
that by 12 or by 4 if you did it quarterly.
Yeah, and and if you're doing it for spouses too, right? Is the juice worth the squeeze?
That's a lot of hassle.
What we normally tell our folks is that if you're close to the Roth IRA threshold limit, one of the things that you may want to consider is you may want to be an annual funder, and you may want to be a Back to the Future annual funder. Meaning that when you get into the next tax year, you look at your tax and say, okay, how much income did I have? Am I Roth eligible or am I not? If I am Roth eligible, great. I'm just going to dump the 2 contributions for me and my spouse into the Roth IRAs. If not, great. I'm going to do a backdoor. I'm going to fund the non-traditional, and I'm then going to convert that to Roth. I just think that you're going to find logistically, it's a whole lot easier to do that. Now, if you're thinking, oh, well, guys, I love dollar cost averaging and I don't want to miss out on that. I know that one of your favorite things is, and we see this, we'll have clients that'll be funding Roths monthly, and they say, hey, I'm getting close. And we say, hey, we don't need to fund the Roth anymore. And we say, okay, let's shut that down. But you say, hey, don't worry, you can still dollar cost average.
Yeah.
You can still put that money to work.
Put it into the brokerage account. You can still have the cash go into the brokerage account monthly, but you're only going to want to do the transaction, I think, once. And here's another reason why is that what I see, if you ask me, what are the letters you have to help clients out with the IRS the most? It's Roth conversions. Because
every year.
Roth,
every year.
The CPA gets confused by Roth conversions. The IRS gets confused by backdoor Roth conversions. And it's not uncommon. We have to kind of step in and be the middle people who I typically write a few letters a year. Mm-hmm. Because the accountant just has a hard time, because realize you're creating transactions that are going to be reported on multiple tax forms. There's a 5329. There's also going to be the 1099-R for the conversion. If you create a bunch of transactions, it's going to be harder for whoever you're trying to explain this already. The word's not complex, but there's a multi-part transaction to the tax preparer and the IRS, don't add complexity. Keep the transaction as simple as possible so it's easy for people to see what was the intent, how did the money flow. And that's another reason that I would encourage you to keep it as few transactions as possible so you can match those numbers up that much easier when you're doing the tax preparation.
Agreed.
Nothing wrong with keeping it simple. Thank you for the question, P61XB. But truly, always glad that you guys are here, and we always appreciate the questions. All right, next question is from Concerned Citizen 45, if that tells you anything about this question. What should mutants be doing if the market seems on the brink of a recession?
Isn't it always?
Tell me more. Tell me more. I'm just trying to think in my mind the last time that I, opened up my internet browser or I looked at my phone and the headline read, "Hey, don't worry. Everything's fine. Things are rocking along. Don't be nervous. The market looks fine." It just is not the case. We always live in this place where there's always something to be frightened about and there's always something on the horizon that's terrifying that is going to throw us into the next recession. And yet, we know that on average, the stock market's down about 2 out of every 10 years. I mean, those are sort of rough numbers. But by and large, most of the time, it's going up over the long term. Now, we do know that intra-year, there's usually like a 14% decline intra-year. But can you control that, concerned citizen? No. You can't control whether the market's going to go up over the next 6 months or down over the next 6 months. So what can you control? Well, you can control your own unique individual risk exposures. The first of which would be like your emergency fund. Based on your station of life, do you have enough cash that if the market did tank and if we slipped into recession, you know that you could pay for your bills if you retired from the portfolio or if you were laid off from your emergency reserves that's there for that reason? Well, then once you step past the emergency reserves, it's okay, is the portfolio that I have designed matching to my risk tolerance and my risk capacity? Do I have an appropriately allocated portfolio that whether the market goes up 20% from here or down 20%, I feel like I am positioned correctly to participate in that? If you begin to get really, really nervous and you're terrified of the next recession and it's causing you to lose sleep at night, I would argue that perhaps your portfolio allocation does not match where you are in your financial journey.
I love talking about always be buying. And let me tell you why. Probability of positive returns for the S&P 500, if you go all the way back to 1937 to just at the end of last year, if you look at it on a day-by-day basis, markets are up 53% of the time.
So it seems like a coin flip on a day-by-day basis.
If you can just hold the assets for a year, 77% of the time, the S&P 500 is actually positive.
Okay, looking a lot better now.
Okay, if you can hold the investment for 3 years, that 77% goes all the way up to close to 88%. It's
So a 3-year rolling
87.7%. If you go to 5 years, 93%. If you can stay invested for 10 years, the market, the S&P 500, 97.4% of the time is positive. Here's the other thing that I always like to share with people is when you look at bear markets versus bull markets, because that's what you're concerned about, is that bear market where the market loses 20%. Is that bear market as scary as you perceive it to be? Or is the opportunity cost, which you really ought to be scared of? And if you look at the typical bull market versus bear markets last around 11 months on average, and they lose on average around 31.7%. If you look at the bull markets, they typically last a little over 4 years, and their cumulative total return is a little under 150%.
Very different.
So I would tell you what you perceive as the big risk, and look, I love our content team is so good they can put this stuff up, is that you let your emotions keep you away from one of the greatest wealth building opportunities out there. So don't let somebody scare you out of investing. Now look, I have told you guys, I don't know what's going to happen. And I've even told the case study story of I had a neighbor who came to me in 2021 and he said, "Brian, I've hung out with you a while. You're always talking about investing. Can you help me set up an S&P 500 investment?" And I said, sure, let's do it. And I logged into Fidelity with him, set it all up with him. He was doing $5,000 a month. He came to me 3 months later and said, I shut that thing down after 2 months because you didn't tell me it could lose money. And so he shut it down. Fast forward, here we are now in 2024. I'm on another trip with this same neighbor, and he goes, hey, can we have that conversation again? And we went and looked at because he only invested 2 months. That $10,000 had gone up a substantial sum. And I did a show earlier where I talked about the actual numbers, but it was up huge, where it averaged over 10% a year for each of the years, even though the first 3 months were scary as all get out, that he shut it down because of the emotional part. So here he is firing up the engines of wealth creation again. Imagine if he'd have kept the $5,000 a month going for the last 36 to 48 months, as this thing keeps rolling forward. That is where it happens, the consistency of always be buying. Don't let your emotions steal from your future success.
I think it was Peter Lynch that said, more money has been lost trying to avoid the next downturn than just participating in the next downturn. And you have to remember that prevent yourself from applying a permanent solution to a very temporary problem. Now, this question was nuanced, Brian, because I want you to speak to this, because this was the actual underlying question. What should a mutant be doing, or how should a financial mutant be thinking if we do head into a recession, if we head into a downturn? I'd be curious to hear your thoughts. Now, remove from a second, like as financial advisors, right? Because obviously we care about the market going down, especially for our retired folks, especially for our folks living off there. But when you, as an investor yourself, start to see market volatility, where's your mind immediately go?
Well, I get excited. I mean, I've told you guys, I even, and I know this is the third time. I really try not to do it too much. But in Millionaire Mission, I talk about how having cash when no one else has cash can be a contrarian wealth building opportunity, meaning that you'll find out that your neighbors, your peers, that there's this, when you get into bear market territory, value gets upended, meaning that what things are worth gets disconnected from the market value or what they're selling at. And if you get those opportunities, this is when Warren Buffett tells you be greedy when others are fearful and fearful when others are greedy. This is what he's talking about. You got to be the contrarian that takes advantage and grabs hold when everybody else is headed for the exits. You're trying to get in there and get some of that. And I think that's a skill set that it's hard for people. And that's why, look, I've said it multiple times. It's a disclaimer. I don't know what's going to happen. And here we are in an election year, and your emotions are being plucked on. The hairs of your emotions are being pulled constantly. And I would just tell you, don't let your political views and don't let that type of stuff influence your financial life and create a blind spot, because you might be surprised that just the concept of humans wanting to innovate and grow is going to be enough to create the wealth. So don't let the news cycle scare you out of your own future wealth.
And our commitment to you is we're going to keep doing this content. We're going to keep, even if the markets do get scary, we're going to keep pouring it out to you. So if you're not subscribed to the channel, make sure you subscribe right now. So every time we put out a new piece of content, you can know. So that way, instead of you making that frightening decision when things get scary, you'll have your best financial friends being the voice of reason telling you to stay the course.
Honestly, that was a great answer, because we do get it. There's uncertainty out there. We don't know what's going to happen. You're all at a different point in your financial journey. And so that's why we're all about helping you come up with a great plan for you that's going to be able to weather these storms. So thank you for being here, and thanks for the question.
The only thing I didn't get to say there that I'm kind of annoyed, because I was like, going back through the answer, walking up the hill with the yo-yo.
Yeah, that's right.
I say that every time anybody asks me about volatility. I'm like, visualizing your head right now that someone is throwing that yo-yo up and down. That's the daily fluctuations of the stock market. You heard 53% of the time it's positive, but that means 47% it's negative. So that really is an up and down. But if you're walking up to higher and higher elevation as you're throwing that yo-yo up and down, you're going to end up in a higher place.
Still going up. Very well said.
It's great.
All right, we've got a question from Kevin B up next. This is a little different. I don't know. It's finance. It's definitely finance, but it's also
Reba's saying something to entertain herself.
A little bit. I mean, it's a good question. I'm
She
sure
does these
here's the
questions
thing.
for
I
her,
know that
honestly.
you guys have seen this before. So I'm just interested to hear what you say to Kevin. He says, I want to retire early at my current standard of living, but my spouse wants to travel extensively in retirement. Should she continue working after I retire? Or should I work longer too? Classic, right? It's what's the goal? What's the why in a marriage? How do people handle this when it comes to retirement? Because again, it's a very personal thing.
So he wants to retire early and maintain current standard of living. She wants to travel when she retires. So I'm assuming that means that in order to travel, it's going to increase standard of living. Is that the assumption?
That's what I would think. Well, yeah, if you're going
I'm
to go
not seeing a camper in their
travel a
future.
lot.
I'm seeing plane tickets and,
Right.
all kind of expensive travel. It sounds
And
Exactly.
so his thought is, sweetheart, I love this idea. What I want you, I'm going to go ahead and retire. You just keep working, keep adding to the pot, and then when you retire, we'll travel around. Is that the way that you're interpreting this?
Well, I think I would encourage him, as being a man that's been married for 26 plus years now. We might want to reframe how we position that question, because this is the beautiful things about marriage, is that we all come in different shapes and sizes. We have different motivations. But this is why you have to understand that money is just a tool, but it's important for you to have good communication on what you each expect out of this powerful tool. Because if you just stick your head in the sand and one or both of you start making the decision of retiring without having this conversation, it's going to be an oopsie or an uh-oh moment. So it's much better, while you're in the control structure of you're both making good livings, measure twice, cut once. Y'all go start talking about this. Figure out where is the common ground. Do you want to go on a trip once a quarter? Or are you planning on going on a trip once a month? Let's actually put pen to paper. I always talk about putting on your 3D glasses.
Yep.
And it's primarily for big life decisions. It can be starting a business, but in this case, it could be trying to plan ahead to know what your future retirement is going to look like. Let's put on your 3D glasses. Let's put in the dream plan. This is where, man, we have so much money. The stock market just keeps going to the moon, and we're making so much that not only do I get to live at my current lifestyle, but I'm throwing you in first class as we fly overseas. This is going to be the best part of our life ever. That's great. Do the dream plan. But I also want you to do the down to earth plan, where you guys go, yeah, this is probably what's going to happen, but realize our investments are going to have volatility. We probably need to pay attention to that. We're also going to probably have some health issues somewhere along the line. We need to take that into account. So let's put a plan that's very down to earth. And then let's not forget the do-do plan. You've got to do the negative plan as well. And y'all do actually pen to paper, or it's probably even a spreadsheet to do this. Or even better yet, go check out, if you go to learn.moneyguy.com, we have a Know Your Number course, so you can actually have a tool as well as the education that y'all can use as a great communication tool to figure out, are you ahead of the curve, behind the curve, and run these different scenarios with the different assumptions. And that way you guys can come together, because you got to have good communication on this, because if you just go into retirement and hope the best will happen, I think you're setting yourself up for a lot of failure and a lot of discomfort.
You know what? I don't like throw pillows. I said it. It's out there. I don't like throw pillows.
I bet you have a lot of throw pillows
There is
on your bed.
zero ROI on throw pillows. They go on the bed on the days that the bed gets made the fancy way, and then when you go to bed, you pull them off, you throw them on the floor, you put them in the whatever. I don't like throw pillows, but you know who likes throw pillows?
Your wife.
My wife. My wife likes throw
I
pillows.
bet. Hey, can you tell me how many throw pillows are on your bed when it's fancy made?
We got a lot. There's a lot of, but here's, but I digress.
I think we have. It's either 5 or 6. I'm trying to visualize if that other pillow makes it. On
We
there or
got
not.
throw pillows and chairs around the house. Anyways, I digress. We had this conversation around
Pillows. You have to take the pillows
That's
off
right.
to sit in the chair.
We had this conversation on, hey, what matters to you? I said, hey, sweetheart, there's zero ROI on throw pillows. It is a pure cost, pure expense. This $1 throw pillow just cost me $88. They're more than $1. But she said, hey, I like them. And I like and so we recognized that there had to be a compromise here, where there was something she valued that maybe I didn't value as much. And so we met there. And she has done the same thing for me. Well, when it comes to retirement goals, you have to do the exact same thing. It sounds like you really you want to retire early. You're ready to leave the workforce. You want to, okay, well, you guys have to put that on your couple whiteboard and say, okay, what is our priority around retiring early? And then, okay, what is our priority around traveling? And how do we prioritize those goals? And you guys have to arrive and agreed upon prioritization around those goals, because then the behaviors that you carry out will then align with how you prioritize those goals. Until you're able to do that, it's not going to be as effective working towards that goals, because there may be a chance, just like Brian said, you can actually do both. You can accomplish both of those things, but I think you're going to find more success doing it together than being at the place, okay, well, I want to retire early. That's my goal. I'll do that. You want to travel. That's your goal. You do that. I just feel like you're going to have an inefficient system to achieve both those goals, where there's a chance, okay, maybe you work a little bit longer and maybe you guys retire a little bit more, or you travel a little more modestly, and then it's a win-win for all parties involved. I think that would be the way that I would approach that.
I'm sitting here laughing to myself because I think about throw pillows. One of my favorite things about throw pillows, because like I said, we have 5 on just the master bed, and I always thought, because I saw it on a decorating show, that you get to, like a Muppet, like Kermit the Frog, you get to karate chop right in the middle to get that nice little crease. So I'm sure somebody was coming over the house, because we found ourselves in this weird situation where we're making the bed together, where she's grabbing one side and I'm grabbing. So that has to be somebody's coming over. So we gotta quickly throw the room together. So we're making, and then I'm so excited because we throw the throw pillows on the bed, and then I go up and I give my biggest Kermit the Frog karate chop to it. And she's like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "Aren't you supposed to do this with throw pillows? You know, you're supposed to put that crease." And she goes, "No, don't do that. Don't do that."
No, the karate chop's a thing. Like that's a thing.
I know it's probably is a thing, but at my house, it's not on it. And she was trying to educate me that I don't know if the couch gets the karate chop or the bed. I just realized I was way outside of my depth.
So you're saying certain throw pillows require karate
I think
chop.
that's true.
This is another reason why throw pillows are asinine. Now even the way that you care for the throw pillow.
I immediately went to a visual of that moment that we're making the bed, and she's telling me all those years. I'm like so proud of myself. I'm like, yeah, look at me. And then that's not the right way to do it.
And every time either the bed gets made or maybe the bed doesn't get made and the throw pillows don't make it back on, I'm like, we just lost a day. That was a day we paid for those throw pillows to be
So here's another thing I think about throw pillows. We're going way off. We need to get through this, but I do find myself entertained is that when the bed's fully made, because I've never laid on the throw pillows. I've never laid on.
They're not pillows to be laid on.
But my youngest daughter, whenever we're in the family room watching something that she doesn't like, she'll go and she'll commandeer our TV in our room. And I when she sits in there like Queen of Sheba on those throw pillows, and she's watching something on Disney Plus. I'm like, okay, those pillows look really comfy for her. So my daughter is the only one that somehow is making use. Or I guess the dog is too. Sometimes I see, Lily, the half Chihuahua, sitting up there like Queen of Sheba too. But I have not laid on top of the throw pillows. I'm sure I'd get scolded.
Well, Kevin's question was great. I think I was going to ask you a follow up on it, but I'm thinking about throw pillows.
Oh, did I screw it up with all the throw pillow work? It's Bo's fault.
I remember,
He's the one that
this
went
is a
there.
curiosity question for me. Have you seen, like anecdotally in life or clients or whatever, couples where like it's not crazy? Like if the wife says, "Yeah, I like my job. I'm going to keep working longer," and he retires early, like that could be an option. You have to make sure it's right and it all pans out for.
I would position
all the details.
that
Have you seen
conversation.
that?
Yes, that happens all the time.
Yeah,
there's also
or vice
couples,
versa. Maybe like she retires early and he keeps working. Like, I'm just curious.
As a financial advisor, I can tell you how many times that couples, and they say it with a joke, but they're dead serious, is that one of us had to keep working or we drive each other crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, how many times have you heard people say that? So, but I would just say if you're making it because of the financial, y'all need to have a good communication on that. Because if you just go into this is husband advice or spouse advice, is that don't go in saying, "Hey, the solution to this is you keep working."
Yes,
I would probably position that from a more of let's go through, answer some questions together, and see if they come to the conclusion that hey, to kind of us to reach all these goals, we're going to keep working. Then you can say, that's a great idea.
Right.
But don't go into it because you might be
You both have to be
some
genuinely okay with
some
it.
conflict.
Like, and come to it together.
You
it
know,
can't be
my
like
parents,
one person.
My parents did that, right? Like that my adopted dad. He was a fireman and he retired like 10
yeah.
years ago. And it was awesome. She kept working, nurse, still rocking and rolling, doing the stuff. And he played racquetball
Honestly,
and
I know
cleaned the
people
house
like
and did
that
yard
too.
work.
Yeah.
And that was it.
Well, and
You know what I mean?
I wondered if it came into play because I know people who there's a bit of an age gap. I think it's like 8 or 9 years, and the wife is younger, and she was like, "Well, I'm not
not
done."
ready to get
and like
out yet.
he's kind of slowing down, and she's like, "I'm still good," and
It's
like
all about
she wanted
common
to,
goals.
yeah.
It's all about being on the
Right.
same page.
And good communication.
Exactly. Anyway, that was a great question, Kevin. Honestly, these were all great questions today. We appreciate you guys being here, showing up every Tuesday, 10 a.m. Central. We love answering your questions. We love knowing what's going on with you so that we can keep hopefully making great content that helps you simplify some of these complex problems and hopefully bring some peace to your stressful situations around finances. So thanks for being here. Just know that moneyguy.com is always there for you. We've got tons of free resources, all of our episodes archived up there for you to go check out anytime you want to continue this conversation or just have a question about personal finance. So thanks for being here.
Hey guys, I would encourage you, if you haven't seen in the last few weeks, we've been putting out some content. Some of them are reacts. And it just reminds me when I see how we're giving reactions and then we try to put some teachable nuggets in there, is that there really is a better way to do money. And I'd encourage you to lean into that, subscribe, turn on those notifications. We're going to load you up with as much free advice as we possibly can so you can build your abundance that much faster. I'm your host, Brian Preston, Mr. Bo Hansen, Money Guy team, out.